All right, week 7 of the 2025 college football season is in the books. We are moving forward into week 8. Today's Monday, and you know what that means. It's time for me to update the LoutubeHere top 25. Now, this top 25 is not a projection of future rankings. I rank my teams based off a combination of factors like resume, record being part of the resume. How good has a team looked? Are they playing better as the season goes along? Are they seemingly playing worse as the season goes along? If teams have similar records, then you have to look at, okay, which team has the better wins or which team has the worst losses or whatever. And I kind of combine all of that in to sort of a top 25. We're going to go through it team by team. I'll do my best to explain to you why I have each team ranked where I do. I don't do that to try to talk you into agreeing with me. No one's ever going to agree with anybody's top 25, top to bottom 100%. One of the biggest complaints you see about things like the AP poll and other rankings that are out there is you have no idea why they have a team ranked where they do. I at least do my best to try to explain that to you. So before we get started, though, shout out to today's sponsor, Sleeper. I did not have any luck on the Sleeper app this past weekend, unfortunately. That's okay. Today's a new week. We'll do better this week. Here you go. Let's see what I did. What did I do last week? My picks, completed picks. Yeah, I the only one I got right was basically the freebie. Every week over on Sleeper, they have a pick or two that's basically guaranteed to hit, like some quarterback to throw for a yard or more. They're just basically giving you one free play. Last week, it was Jalen Hurts to, passing yards more than 0.5. Duh. I hit that one. Unfortunately, I missed on the other two. I had Carnell Tate to go over 65 yards. And what did he have? Does it even tell me on here? He had 41. Missed that one. And I had Cam Coleman, the Auburn wide receiver, to go over 50 yards. He finished with exactly 50. I had over 50.5. He finished with 50. So nearly hit the Cam Coleman pick. Not even really close on the Carnell Tate pick, off by almost 25 yards there. So missed on my Sleeper pick this past week, but that's okay. We're going to get them back this week. Make sure you download the Sleeper app. You can have yourself a lot of fun watching these games every weekend and potentially win yourself some money. In fact, you can win up to 1,000 times your money over at Sleeper. Use the promo code LOU, L-O-U. There's a link in the description of this video. Click that link. It'll download the app for you. Use the promo code LOU, and they're going to give you a 100% match on your first deposit up to $100. So you deposit $100 in there, they're going to give you another $100 on your first deposit up to $100. There's also the new promotion that started last week where all you have to do is download the account or download the app, create a new account, use promo code LOU, L-O-U, and they're just going to fund your account $20. No questions asked. You don't have to make any deposit at all. It's just a free $20 play, courtesy of Uncle Lou. Download the Sleeper app today. You'll be glad you did. All right, let's get into it. Where you want the rankings? Here? All right, we'll put them over here. There you go. This week's top 25. I left Miami at number 1. They were off. They didn't play. Ohio State had another good win, this time against Illinois. Not enough for me to move Ohio State ahead of Miami, though. I still think Miami has probably the best resume in college football. Indiana is getting close to that. Indiana extremely impressive. Again, we'll get to them in a minute, but I've still got Miami there at number 1. They're 5-0. They play Louisville this coming week. It's a Friday night game, but it's a home game. Miami catches a break here because a lot of weird things happen on Friday nights when ranked teams have to go on the road and play unranked teams. But with Miami being at home, you would think they could handle business there, but they host Louisville on Friday night. Ohio State, I left at number 2. They got a pretty good win. They beat what was a ranked Illinois team. You can see I've dropped Illinois out of my rankings, but barely. They would be close. They would be in the others receiving votes category, I guess. I'll do what I did last week at the end of the video. I'll show you. I think it's 9 teams I have outside of my top 25 that I considered ranking somewhere 20 to 25. So I'll show you like the next 9 teams in line, I guess. But anyway, I still think it was a pretty good win for Ohio State. They handled them easily. Game was never in question on the road at Illinois, winning 34-16. They play on the road at Wisconsin this week. So you would assume another fairly easy win for Ohio State. Wisconsin's in a really bad way. I moved Indiana all the way up to number 3. I don't know what else Indiana has to do for people to stop doubting them, myself included. I've been very crystal clear. I wanted Indiana to be bad because I don't like Kurt Signetti. Unfortunately, not only are they not bad, they're really good. They might be the best team in the country. I don't know who the best team in the country is. Could be Indiana, could be Texas Tech, could be Miami, could be Ohio State. Maybe it's Bama. I mean, the point is, I just have no idea. But they're undefeated. They've got a couple of really good wins, and they handled business on the road at a very difficult place to play. Eugene, Oregon. Handed Oregon their first ever Big Ten loss. You remember Oregon was undefeated in the regular season last year and then won the Big Ten championship. So this was Oregon's first conference loss as a member of the Big Ten. And Indiana dominated this game from start to finish. They ended up winning 30-20, but the game was never in doubt at all. Indiana is very impressive. Mendoza is a Heisman caliber quarterback. They've got playmakers on both sides of the ball that can disrupt games and take games over. They're good along the lines of scrimmage. They don't beat themselves. They're going to be a problem for anybody they play, including the playoffs coming up in December. But I've got Indiana at 3. Same thing with Texas Tech. Now, they don't have the resume of these top 3 teams, which is why I've got Texas Tech 4 and Texas A&M 5. I think Miami, Ohio State, and Indiana, to me, all have better resumes than Texas Tech. They're all undefeated. Texas Tech could beat some of those teams. Texas Tech could beat all of those teams. Texas Tech's a really, really good team. They continue to impress me week after week after week. All they do is win and blow people out. And they did it again. They beat Kansas 42-17. They've covered the spread every single week, which in the end doesn't really matter. It's just, it gives you an indication that Texas Tech is even better than people expect them to be every single week. You know, a lot of teams, Ole Miss, for example, had a close win this past weekend at home against a really bad Washington State team. Now, there's probably reasons for that. They played Georgia this week, and they probably honestly didn't spend a lot of time preparing for Washington State. They've probably been preparing for Georgia for 2 weeks. Nearly bit them. But Ole Miss did get the win. More on them in a minute. But, I mean, Indiana and Texas Tech, we have to forget the logos on the side of their helmets and that it's Indiana and Texas Tech, and these aren't two traditionally great programs. They're great right now. You know, what happened 20 years ago, 40 years ago, or 5 years ago doesn't appear to be having any impact on Texas Tech and Indiana. They both look really, really good. I think they're both legitimate top 5 teams right now. Same thing for Texas A&M. They keep winning. They might not have as marquee a win as, say, Indiana on, beating Oregon on the road. But let's not forget Texas A&M did go on the road and beat Notre Dame. And I know Notre Dame's got 2 losses. You can see I've got them ranked 15th. Notre Dame lost to 2 top 5 teams. They lost to Texas A&M, close, and they lost to Miami, close. 5 points total in those 2 losses for Notre Dame? I'm not saying that to make Notre Dame seem more than they are. I'm still not convinced Notre Dame deserves a playoff spot. We'll see what happens with them down the road. We'll talk about them in a second. But I think Texas A&M is a good team. And right now, them and Ole Miss, are those the only 2 undefeated teams left in the SEC? I've got them at 5 and 6. Texas A&M plays at Arkansas this week, and Ole Miss plays at Georgia. So they both play road games this week. What are the odds that they both remain undefeated? Not good. Both of them could lose. One of them is probably going to lose. But right now they're undefeated, and I've got them at 5 and 6. Oregon, I dropped to 7. I've got them at the front of the line in terms of undefeated teams. Here's the thing between them and Bama. Who would I pick to win that game if they played tomorrow is irrelevant. That is not what I base my rankings on. It's possible I would pick Alabama to beat Oregon. But these 2 teams here, I think, are both playing like 2 of the best 10 teams in the country, and they both have the same record. So I have to start comparing wins and losses. Well, Alabama, I think, has better wins than Oregon. They've got a win at Georgia. That's Georgia's only loss. They've got a win at Missouri. That's Missouri's only loss. They've got a win at home against Vanderbilt. That's Vanderbilt's only loss. There are 3 one-loss teams in the SEC whose only loss is to Alabama. Those are 3 pretty good wins. What does Oregon have for good wins? On the road at Penn State. All right, now let's compare losses. Oregon's loss came at home, 20-10, to a top 5 team, Indiana. Alabama lost to Florida State. That's a terrible loss. And that is why I have Oregon ahead of Alabama. Oregon has a much better loss than Bama. They've got the same record. If they played tomorrow, who would win? Got no idea, and that's got nothing to do with my ranking. That's a power rating you're looking for. If you're wanting a list of teams by who would beat who in a specific order, that's called a power rating. You can look elsewhere for that. I've got Oregon. I've got Oregon at what is that, 7, and Alabama at 8. Ole Miss, I mentioned them. I got them at 6. They did win this week, but it wasn't pretty. 24-21 at home against Washington State. I'm convinced they're just looking forward to the Georgia game, and honestly, I don't blame them. Washington State is terrible. One of the worst teams in the I guess we're still counting them as a Power 4 team. They're horrific. And Ole Miss escapes with a win there, 24-21. Big showdown for them on the road in Athens this coming week is going to be a huge game. Georgia, speaking of Georgia, I've got them at 9. They won on the road at Auburn. Wasn't pretty. One of the worst first halves of Georgia football I've seen in a long time. And credit to Auburn for that. They played great defensively. They found a rhythm on offense early in the game and were able to get out to a lead over Georgia. Flip the script in the second half. Auburn just couldn't do anything offensively. I think they had 40 yards total in the second half, and Georgia comes back and gets the win. Controversial officiating stuff in that game. I talked about it in yesterday's video. If you want to hear it, the referees ought to be embarrassed and ashamed of themselves, and they ought not be allowed to referee another game. They were completely overwhelmed by the moment. The whole Kirby Smart timeout thing was a complete disaster. Kirby Smart called a timeout. What he meant to do, or what he says he was trying to do, I don't know. But I've been watching football for 40 years, and this means timeout. That's what that means. It's the universal symbol for timeout. If he accidentally did this and meant to do this, that's on Kirby. Georgia should have been assessed a timeout. They weren't. Okay, next play, Georgia hits a long one. The referees make up a fake penalty against Georgia to make up for the fact that they screwed up the timeout. So it had no effect on the game that screwed up timeout. That's besides the point. The referees are horrific. I'm not going to spend an hour talking about that because I did that yesterday. Those referees ought to be embarrassed and ashamed of themselves. I've got Georgia at 9 after winning at Auburn on the road. They host Ole Miss this coming weekend, like I mentioned. Tennessee, I've got at 10. Their only loss was in overtime at home to Georgia, one of the best games of the season so far. A great game, really, by both teams, and it just came down to the end. Tennessee, of course, misses a field goal at the end of regulation that would have won it, goes to overtime. Georgia gets the win. That's their only loss. They won this past weekend at home against Arkansas, a little closer probably than a lot of people thought it would be. But when you look around the country and see other teams losing games that they shouldn't be losing, it's hard to come down too hard on somebody like Tennessee, who you say, well, wow, they didn't beat them as much as I thought they would. At least they didn't lose, because there's a lot of that going around. Tennessee, they're sitting there still with just the one loss, and they do play on the road at Alabama this week. So a massive, massive game for both teams. Now, Alabama currently 0 conference losses. So they're tied with Ole Miss and Texas A&M at the top of the SEC standings, because all 3 of those teams have 0 conference losses. A loss to Tennessee, though, would give them a conference loss and would move Tennessee ahead of Bama, because they'd own the head-to-head. Georgia would be there with 1 loss, with a win over Tennessee. So you get into a 3-way tiebreaker situation there between those 3 for second place, depending on what happens with Ole Miss and Texas A&M. But it's going to be a mess in the SEC, especially in November, and it starts this weekend with Georgia, Ole Miss, and Alabama, Tennessee. Georgia Tech, I've got at 11, and I'm going to be honest, once we get outside of here, these top 10 teams, it becomes a lot harder for me to determine exactly what amount of good some of these teams are. I watched Georgia Tech play, and they're one of the most hard-nosed, gritty teams in the country, and I think they're going to be a tough out for almost anybody they play, especially if Haynes King and that offense is able to play sort of their style of football offensively, which is to slow everything down. A lot of Haynes King runs. Georgia Tech plays good defense. They're disciplined. Then on the other hand, I watch them play, and they don't look as good as some of the top teams. Now, that's irrelevant, right? Because if Georgia Tech gets an opportunity to play one of these top teams, and they're going to play at least one of them, Georgia, at the end of the year, they could find a way to win the game. Georgia Tech is undefeated. I've got them behind several one-loss teams, and make of that what you will. I just feel like you start looking for big Georgia Tech wins. They do have the Clemson win, but it doesn't. Everybody above them's got better wins. I know they don't have any losses, and that matters. And look, they're going to continue to move up if they continue to win. And they can afford a loss or two, to be honest. All they need to do is get to the ACC championship game. If they get there, 99% chance they're making the playoffs. Now, if they win the ACC championship game, 100% chance they get in. But if they even make it to the ACC championship game, they're likely getting in. Clemson has played themselves out. Louisville's got a loss. Virginia's got 1 loss. Miami's got 0 losses. It's looking pretty good for Georgia Tech. I've got BYU at 12. They're also undefeated. But it's just the level of competition. It's the same thing with Georgia Tech. I look at these teams in the top 10, and I realize that maybe, Ole Miss maybe doesn't have a marquee win. Maybe you can Texas Tech, maybe. Although I think at Texas Tech win at Utah is extremely impressive. But BYU is also undefeated. I've got them and Georgia Tech grouped together. I'm trying to sort of give them the respect I think they deserve for being halfway through the season and not having lost any games. But similar to Georgia Tech, I watch BYU play, and they just don't look as good as a lot of the top teams. Just like Georgia Tech, it's not going to matter if they keep winning. It's just not going to matter. I think Utah, if I'm going just on how teams look, I'd have Utah ahead of BYU. I'd have maybe another team or two who has losses ahead of BYU. So I am rewarding them for being undefeated. But I do feel like there's several one-loss teams here that I've got ranked ahead of them. LSU I've got behind that at 13. Georgia Tech, by the way, plays on the road at Duke this week, and BYU plays at home versus Utah. So, hey, if I'm wrong about BYU and they really are a legitimate top 10 team, they'll beat Utah like Texas Tech did. And then, next week my BYU ranking will reflect that. What I think is going to happen is that BYU is going to go on the road and probably lose, or at home and lose to Utah. I think Utah probably beats BYU this week. You can see I've got BYU ranked ahead of Utah, but again, this isn't a power rating or a prediction of what I think will happen. If this was a ranking of what I thought would happen, I'd have Utah higher and BYU lower. BYU's undefeated. I've got them at 12. LSU, I've got at number 13. They won at home this past week against South Carolina. They still have just the 1 loss. They play this week on the road at Vandy. I'm probably taking Vandy in that game. So again, just because I have a team ranked below somebody else, this isn't a power rating. Vandy has the loss. LSU has the loss. LSU's got, I think, a better win right now than Vandy has, which is why I've got LSU up a little bit higher, but they play this week. It'll sort itself out. Missouri, I've got at 14, and you can make the argument Missouri should be 9th. Or 10th, right behind Alabama and Georgia, or maybe right behind Tennessee. They lost at home to Alabama by 3. Same thing Georgia did. What's the difference here? Georgia's got a win at Tennessee. Mizzou's best win is Kansas or South Carolina. So it's not Missouri's fault. They just haven't played the meat of their schedule. They're starting that now. Missouri is. They play at Auburn this week. They play Texas A&M later in the year. So they get opportunities to play tougher competition, which would improve their resume, right, if they win. And if they do that, they'll move right back up. So I didn't really punish them. I didn't drop them that much. I think I might have had them at 11 or 12 last week, got them at 14 this week, a close 3-point loss at home to Alabama. Notre Dame, I've got at 15. They have looked impressive. It's true. They have blown out everybody. They blew out Arkansas, blew out NC State. They blew out Boise State. I mean, they're destroying everybody they play. That is true. It's also true that they've played 2 ranked teams and they lost to both of them. I'm not going to ignore that. Miami's number 1. I've got Texas A&M at 5. They barely lost to those games, but it's the only ranked competition they've played. Now, they play Southern Cal this week. Southern Cal had a big win last weekend at home against Michigan. I've got Southern Cal ranked at 20. So if Notre Dame beats Southern Cal, that will be impressive. And Notre Dame will probably move up some with that win, depending on what else happens around them. But I'm not just going to ignore the fact that Notre Dame has played 2 ranked teams and lost them both. They're not in a conference. So it's possible they could run the table and get in at 10-2. If they do that, their best win will have been Southern Cal. They need Southern Cal to win the majority of their games left on their schedule. They obviously need to beat Southern Cal, but then they need Southern Cal to win the majority of their remaining games to make that Southern Cal win look good. Because without a win over Southern Cal, their best win is going to be Navy. And just is what it is because they're not in a conference. Oklahoma, Disappointing. Extremely disappointing. Not even so much that they lost. It's a rivalry game. You see weird things from time to time. They were not competitive in this game. I don't know if John Mateer came back a little early. He looked awful. 3 interceptions. They had no run game at all to help support John Mateer. And Texas just took it to them from the word go. You could tell Texas was a team that wanted this game more, and it's understandable. They had 2 losses. They were coming off an embarrassing loss to Florida. They had already lost that game at home to Ohio State. They're sitting here at 2 losses. If they'd have lost this game, their season is practically over. With 3 losses halfway through the season, that would be it for Texas. So kind of a must-win spot for them, and they got the job done. So not a huge surprise to me, again, that Texas won the game, but it wasn't even competitive. And you can probably make the case to have Texas higher than this and Oklahoma a little lower than this. But because Oklahoma only has the 1 loss and Texas has 2, and one of those Texas 2 losses is a terrible, terrible loss to Florida, I still have Oklahoma ranked ahead of Texas. Complete and total body of work, not ranking the teams based off of only what happened this past weekend. This is the entire season goes in to these rankings here. So Oklahoma loses. They drop to 16. They play on the road at South Carolina this week, which I think is going to be a difficult game for Oklahoma. I know South Carolina's not great. They haven't lived up to expectations this year, but that can be a difficult place to play. And Oklahoma licking their wounds right now after getting whipped by Texas. So dangerous spot here for Oklahoma on the road coming up this weekend at South Carolina. Virginia, I've got here right behind Oklahoma at 17. Virginia's been an impressive team this year. They took a head-scratching loss kind of to NC State earlier in the year, but of course have the win over Florida State. Won the following week against Louisville, which is still Louisville's only loss. So I've got Virginia ranked here at, what is that, 17. They were on a bye week this week, and they host Washington State this coming week. Same Washington State team that took Ole Miss to the wire this past week. They've got to travel there, though, all the way out to the West Coast to play that game against Washington State. So tricky game for Virginia this week. That bye week comes at a good time, though, to have to make a trip like this. Vanderbilt, I've got right after that. You can make the argument they should be higher, and if they win this weekend, they probably will move higher. They host LSU. And I'm probably going to end up picking Vandy to win that game. I'm still not sold on LSU offensively. Nussmeier just has not looked great this year, and they needed him to. The defense has played well for the most part for LSU, but the offense has been underwhelming. A big game for both teams this week, both Vandy and LSU. I've got Vandy right there at 17. South Florida, I moved all the way up to 18. They're clearly the best group of 5 team to me. Their only loss is to Miami, who I have ranked number 1. They've got a Power 4 win against Florida, and they are not just beating, but they are blowing out other decent group of 5 teams. They had a game against North Texas this past week on a Friday night. They had to go on the road, dangerous thing to do, to play an undefeated North Texas team. And it was a wild game, not going to lie. 6 turnovers in the first quarter of that game, 3 by each team. But in the third quarter in particular, South Florida just put the pedal to the metal and pulled away and ended up just blowing them out in the end, 63-36, the final score. They host FAU this coming weekend. But right now, to me, they are the best group of 5 team. Southern Cal, I moved all the way up to 20. Impressive win by them against Michigan. They were really able to limit Michigan's ground game, which not a lot of people have been able to do this year. And say what you want about Lincoln Riley and those defenses, and Lord knows I've said a lot. I do think their front 4, their front 7, when it comes to stopping the run, is much better this year than what we've seen under previous versions of a Lincoln Riley team. I still think Southern Cal's got some issues in the secondary and can be vulnerable to the pass. Michigan, of course, not able to take advantage of that. Bryce Underwood, he may end up being good, but right now he's still sort of a work in progress when it comes to throwing the ball. And some of it's not his fault. Michigan's wide receivers aren't anything special either. But Southern Cal got a good win against that Michigan team, 31-13, not even close. They play on the road at Notre Dame this coming week. Massive game, particularly for Notre Dame. A must-win game for Notre Dame, not just because it would be their 3rd loss, but they need a win against somebody that people respect. And they don't have very many opportunities to do that left this year. They need to beat Southern Cal at home. Notre Dame does. I've got Utah at 21. Another good win for them this week. They beat Arizona State 42-10. Now, Arizona State didn't have Sam Leavitt, so make it at what you will. This Arizona State team is clearly not the same team it was last year. They had already lost earlier in the year on the road at Mississippi State. Now they take another loss to Utah. Not looking good for Arizona State in terms of winning the Big 12 or a return trip to the playoffs for them. I've got Utah at 20. Nebraska, moving them up to 21 and Cincinnati to 22. Both of these teams each only have one loss. Nebraska beat Cincinnati in week 1. I thought that was a red flag for Nebraska because the game was a lot closer than I thought it would be, and I didn't think Cincinnati was going to be very good. Well, Cincinnati hasn't lost since then. All they've done is win. They've won 5 straight games since that opening week loss. Cincinnati's now 5-1. Nebraska's also 5-1. Why the AP poll? They've got Cincinnati at 24, Nebraska at 25. These two teams have the exact same record, very similar resumes, and we saw them play. One beat the other, but they've got the order reversed. It's really, really weird. I've got Nebraska here at 21, Cincinnati at 22. Nebraska plays on the road at Minnesota. Cincinnati plays on the road at Oklahoma State. Both of these teams should improve to 6-1 next week. Memphis, welcome to the top 25, the Memphis Tigers. Still don't like their head coach because he's got plenty of dumb shit to say. But the football team just keeps winning, and they did it again. No, they were off this past week. They're 6-0. They play on the road at UAB, so they're undefeated, and they're sort of the next team in line, I think, if South Florida stumbles. And Texas, I moved down to 25, almost unranked them, but I got them hanging in there at number 25, and they did win. I had them unranked before this week after they lost to Florida because they had no Power 4 wins. They beat Oklahoma. I had Oklahoma in my top 10. So I moved Texas back into the top 25 at number 25, but they're hanging by a thread there. Texas is. They play on the road at Kentucky this coming week. So there it is. That's the top 25. Now here's the next 9 teams that would be sort of in line that I sort of considered when I was working out basically 20 through 25. These teams almost made it, but didn't quite. Illinois, Navy, and Washington. Washington only has 1 loss, and it's to Ohio State. Illinois has 2 losses, but it's to 2 of the top 3 teams in the country. They lost to Ohio State, and they lost to Indiana. So, I mean, eventually you got to start winning some of these games against quality competition, but, they're close. And Navy is undefeated. You see UNLV in this group, too. Navy and UNLV are both undefeated group of 5 teams. UNLV plays Boise State this coming week, so big game in terms of group of 5 playoff potential and rankings, which is what, of course, determines which group of 5 team gets in, would be a big win for either of those 2 teams if they could get it, particularly UNLV, because I don't know that Boise State is going to be able to pass South Florida and Memphis because they have 2 losses. UNLV is undefeated. If they beat Boise State, then I think UNLV will start getting some consideration alongside South Florida and Memphis as that best group of 5 team. Michigan dropped them out of the rankings. They've now got, they lost to Southern Cal. So 2 losses now for Michigan on the road at Oklahoma, on the road at Southern Cal. We'll see what they do the rest of the way. Shaky ground for Sharon Moore. An 8-4 Michigan team may have a new head coach next year. I don't know. We'll see how the rest of this season plays out for Michigan and Sharon Moore. Mississippi State, I think they're a decent team. They, of course, have the win over Arizona State, which doesn't look quite as good now as it did when it happened. They gave Tennessee all they wanted a couple of weeks ago, but came up short. I think they're an improved team for sure over last year. They were 2-10 last year. Not quite top 25 material, though. Iowa State headed in the wrong direction here. They've lost a couple of games in a row now. Hard to see them getting back into the top 25. North Texas took their first loss of the year, but it got blown out by South Florida. Going to be hard for them to get back in the top 25. And Louisville right now has just 1 loss. Now, they've got an opportunity not just to get into the top 25 this week, but probably crack the top 20. They go on the road and play Miami. If they were able to pull that off, you'd have to reevaluate your thought process around Louisville and probably move them into your top 20. But right now, outside looking in. All right, there you go. That's this week's top 25. I appreciate you watching. Have a good morning.